People's Overview and Scrutiny. Have we any apologies for absence? Yes. Could you please note that, Stella? The silver bit at the bottom.
Oh, I thought I had done. Sorry, Stella. So yes, so we have apologies from Omar Bush. Okay, and we have Thomas Barlow in replacement. Thank you.
Are the minutes for the previous meeting agreed? Any matters arising from anybody? Right, thank you. Any declaration of pecuniary interest? No. Right, thank you. The agenda this evening has been slightly changed because part of the item agenda number 8, the departmental update, includes something from the young people and the young people survey. So Keith Shipman has come here, who is involved with the young people who did it. We've got Lola from the young people coming to talk to us and show us a video, and Sukhpal, who's the participation and engagement manager. Thank you very much to all three of you for coming. We're looking forward to it to interest. So over to the three of you.
Thank you very much. The survey, it was undertaken because in Children's Schools and Families, we were concerned we needed to hear how has the pandemic been for young people. So we thought it was really important to hear their views, their voice, and their understanding of what's occurred. So after the first year of the pandemic, we went out and commissioned Partnership for Young London, which is a London-based youth charity, to work with our young inspectors to craft a survey and to listen to what young people had to say in Merton. So Lola was one of the young inspectors employed by Merton, and she was involved in it. So Lola's going to now say a few things about the survey and her experience of it, and then we'll show the video. Thank you.
Hi everyone. Sorry.
Hello and welcome.
Thank you. So we went out to different schools and the survey was sent out to different varieties of primary schools as well to get the young people feel on what some of the issue was during COVID period and what they enjoy and what they did not enjoy and what some of the concerns were. And we did a focus group, and during the focus group, we found out that most young people had concern about their mental health or support not being available when they needed it, or no one to speak to during the lockdown period. And most people did enjoy the school online, and some of them did not really enjoy because they feel like they've missed out a lot and they had a lot to catch up on when they get back to school, and there was not really that much of a support with them transferring back from online to school and be able to actually catch up quickly. Is that there's a lot that was put into in the time period. So they feel like maybe taking it step by step and maybe slowly ease it into the in-class session might help them. So maybe get back to the way that they used to learn before. And a lot of them was about not eating 3 times a meal, and which was really surprising to find out, especially from the young people, younger kids from 7, 8, they miss meal as well, and they don't really exercise a lot as they will have or meet out with their friend. They use more of screen period, and that has actually affected them going out. A lot of them have to change group of friends as well because they lose contact with them, and also there was not really a way to keep contact with them. So that is quite shocking to find out as well. And a lot of them did mention about the bowel on its own, not being safe, and also there's a lot of litter around. So they was trying to figure out how they can be involved more into how to look after the environment and also what to do to make sure that they're safe. A couple of the boys we spoke to, they were saying that if they leave a barrel and try to go to another barrel, they feel scared of their life because of how unsafety it is. And I feel like that should not be the situation. I feel like people should be able to move about to any barrel that they want, being safe and not having that fear in mind. So we need to figure out what we can do to prevent that from happening. And then a lot of them was talking about support in general. They don't know who to contact, even though the school did try to help, but it was not really a lot because the school was closed for a short period of time. And we've got a video which explains a bit more about some of the recommendations that we've made and way to move forward. So if you have any question, please, I'm welcome to answer any of the questions. Thank you.
Lola, thank you very much indeed. It's really good to hear from you rather than just reading all about it. So thank you very much, and thank you for your brief summary of everything. Did Keith or Pal, do either of you want to add anything before?
So I think what we're going to do now is watch the film. So, and then people can ask questions in response to the film, which I think Carl's going to organise, I hope.
Yep, I'm going to share it now. He says.
Hello, we are Young Inspectors, a group of young people who live, learn and socialise in Merton.
The council wants to know how COVID has affected people like us and what we want for the future. So they handed the power to us to investigate.
To do this, we created surveys and hosted focus groups, around 35,000 minutes from over 2,000 young people.
You've probably contributed through your school or youth group. Maybe you even recognise us.
These are our findings. This is our voice.
We found that over a third of young people in Merton were worried about their mental health during lockdown. Many of us felt bored and more anxious, either about our loved ones getting COVID or falling behind at school and sports. Many young people still rely on their friends and family for support for their mental health rather than going to GPs or mental health professionals. Young people also told us that they spend way more time looking at screens during lockdown, but this was largely to keep in contact with their friends on social media apps.
Our screen time was like much longer. I'm talking like hours, like hours a day, probably like more than half the day on our screens, for me personally.
Did that affect your sleep?
Yeah, 100%. We'll be up to like 3 o'clock in the morning.
Literally.
Or like 4 o'clock in the morning, just sitting there like on our phones or laptops or iPads or whatever.
YouTube.
Just doing so
Snapchat,
much.
Yeah.
I was on my phone every day. It helped me to build a lot of more connections with my friends. Like normally I'd see them at school and I won't speak to them till the next day at school. But now I've got them over the phone. I'm on the phone to them for about 12 hours. I went on my phone one time, it said I was on screen time for 14 hours. I was shocked, but I think that's just because we didn't have nothing else to do. It was quite boring during lockdown.
1 out of 10 young people said that they had to skip meals because there wasn't enough food, whilst 1 in 20 had to not eat for a whole day because there wasn't enough food.
I was actually helping people get food as well. Like we was in my household, we were giving out boxes of cans and stuff to like my neighbours and stuff. So we was helping our community, but then I was making a lot of new foods and like stuff with my siblings and doing like a lot of cooking with them.
Yeah, I found myself making concoctions, I guess you could call it, with food, and not just food, but like different things, like stuff for my hair, for example, and like baking, and just found myself in the kitchen more often than usual.
Over a third of young people said that COVID-19 and lockdown had a positive impact on their relationship with family. We found that many young people had used this time to bond with their parents or siblings. Many of us also relied far more on our friends for support during COVID-19.
Being around each other was a bit hectic at first. Well, not at first, it was always like that.
Yeah, it did, because it drew us closer. Even though we was constantly getting annoyed at each other, got closer, spent more time with each other.
Well, my mother was ill and she passed away in lockdown. I really did care about her a lot, so it was a bit hard for all my siblings and me in lockdown as we had an ill mum, so yeah.
Her family was on my mind all the time.
Yeah.
Like, literally.
She'd come over sometimes and
Yeah.
she'd just say hi to my mom, and it would have to be like either outside the door or something. It was just so long.
Yeah.
But it's so lovely to see that people, throughout this whole journey I've been on, there's people still here for me.
COVID really affected our education, and many of us found it harder to learn online, especially if we were in important stages of our education, such as doing exams or moving school. Learning at home could be filled with distractions, with failing Wi-Fi or no space to work away from family. As a result, we found that 3 out of 4 young people were worried about falling behind or felt less confident about their learning because of COVID-19 and lockdown.
I feel like before lockdown there was a structure. Obviously we had Year 7, Tier 8, Tier 9, everyone was learning. Lockdown kind of interrupted everything. It stopped a lot of people from learning. A lot of my friends personally that I know, they would stop going on to online lessons. They were left far behind. Me, myself, I was left quite far behind after a long 7-month period of no learning.
At first, he didn't have the laptop, and our school contacted our mum asking why we was not attending our online sessions. So they provided us with a laptop to share until we was back at school. It was really stressful. Especially like the subjects I found easier. I was alright with those, but other subjects such as history and English I struggled with the most. So not being able to get the information I needed and the support I needed, it affected my grade. Whereas if we wasn't in lockdown, I could have got a better grade.
I was in Year 11 when COVID happened, so we didn't really have a proper leavers party. School didn't really help with transitioning. I don't know if that's because of COVID or they just wanted us to go, but me personally, I think they could have done better, like going to a different environment, some people's mental health, and I know now some people's mental health is not that good, like they're overthinking stuff, anxiety, depression.
Young people feel safe across the borough. However, certain areas in the borough were seen as more unsafe, and certain groups in the borough feel more unsafe. This was similar to our findings on the police, where generally young people had a positive opinion of the police, but certain groups were more likely to have a negative opinion. We also found that over a third of young people in Merton said they knew someone who had been stopped and searched, while 1 in 10 had been stopped and searched themselves.
I see a lot of people being stopped and searched in my community. I don't really like how that happens a lot because normally it's not for a good reason. So it's not even to ask on their awareness, if they've seen someone or anything. And it's just scary in general.
It's like they have an image on who they want to stop. And you see a normal pedestrian walking on the road. What to the police, they might seem as if they're in a gang, getting stopped at 14, 15. That's wrong. I personally think it's really wrong. I think they should live a childhood without all of that.
I feel like school kind of acted like a distraction to most people. And once we're out of school and people had nothing to do, if they went online playing games on their phone on social media, they wanted to go outside, and more people were groomed into poorly behaved groups, and it led to more delinquents in more areas. I attend my youth club because I feel like it's a safe area for everyone to be in. It's a safe environment. Not really many trouble goes on, and like when people are feeling down or if they're bored, rather than going out and doing something that could get them into trouble, going there is like a kind of like a getaway for most people.
On the whole, we found that Merton is a great place to live. We love our local area and we want to take more care of it. We have vibrant local communities and we want to see young people represented both within these communities but also in decision making about spaces for young people. When it comes to having a voice, we found that young residents feel excluded and not listened to when it comes to decisions that impact them locally. Almost half of young people in Merton said that they have felt that they have no say at all in how projects and activities are designed for young people.
I'm so happy that we at Merton have decided to do this survey and to listen to young people. We've been doing a larger resident survey, and I think that's really, really important too. But often if you do that, you miss out the voices of the children and young people whose experiences might be very different. And it's those young people growing up here whose future we really care about. So we really want their views on how we invest going forward over the next 10, 20 years in what we're doing in Merton. And so what we really want to do is get some clear recommendations coming out of this about what Merton should be doing to address the concerns that have been come up, but also address the kind of positive things that people like about the borough and make sure that we're supporting those as well. So I've really enjoyed looking at the results coming through the survey, but I'm really keen and really happy to kind of meet the Youth Parliament, the young inspectors and all those young people directly involved in this to hear their thoughts and make sure that they're telling us directly as decision makers what they want to happen as a result of this.
Young people have so many great ideas of things that, you know, could really be rolled out in society and in communities. I think young people's voices are heard to a certain degree, but at the same point, nothing's followed up with that. So they almost feel a sense of, why should I share to start with when I know no action's going to be taken as a result of that? And I think when we have these conversations, when we hold youth forums, when we talk to the young people about what they want, for me, if we're going to take the effort to listen to them, you know, if they do come up with a good ideas, for us to kind of act upon that.
Thank you very much for sharing that video with us. It was very interesting and listening to more people's points of view, more young people's. Is there anything you want to add, any of you, before we open it for questions?
So just the last comment really, because obviously the next, what that says is, and so what? So what do we do next? So the first so what is that the first presentation of this was to the Children's Trust. And the Children's Trust worked with listened to the young inspectors and the chair of the Youth Parliament and accepted the recommendations from the Youth Parliament about being involved in decision making. So the basis of the plan for the Children's Trust for the next year is based on the findings from the youth survey. So the youth survey has been woven into all of the actions from which will go forward to the Children's Trust moving forwards. And within that, one specific action was about joint decision making. So a pot of money of £10,000 has been put to the Youth Parliament and the young inspectors, Youth Parliament and young inspectors to make common decisions on making sure the voice of young people is heard. So that's a piece of work that we'll be taking forward after April.
Thank you very much. If anyone's got any questions, could you also say to whom that question is addressed, whether it's Lola, Sir Pal, have I pronounced your name correctly?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Or Keith. Any questions? Anyone got any questions? Right, Nick.
Yeah, thank you very much. When I was going back into ancient history of this, when I was chair of the panel that preceded this panel, we actually used to have a youth member actually on the panel in itself, actually taking part in all the decision makings. And there was quite a lot of interaction with the Youth Parliament at that stage, and there was a limited amount of decision making done in concert. Where along the way did we lose that, if we did? Keith probably be able to answer
that. Thank you. I think the Parliament's come to different ages and stages. Our Youth Parliament at the moment is quite young. They're largely year 7 and 8. The chair is older, but they're a younger group that have come in now, and they need to build up their experience and confidence. I think that's partly it. I think coming into a forum like this is quite intimidating, and for Lola's doing a great job today, but it's quite a difficult thing for even officers to come into. So I think it's having the right young people at the right time. I think that's the answer. I think we've, over the last few years, done some excellent work across the council with the young inspectors, and they've had a real impact. There's a group of young inspectors, my microphone's doing funny things. There's a group of young inspectors you may be aware of that have worked with public health all the way through the pandemic, and they've been producing films and information for schools and for young people. There's been a young adults group run by the young inspectors. So they've been very, very engaged, but they probably haven't been so engaged in scrutiny. That's the issue.
Briefly, Nick.
Yeah, very quickly come back on that. I mean, I appreciate that, that there are cohorts of young people who are more able or less able. You could say exactly the same thing about counsellors for that matter. So realistically, what can we actually do to promote those voices that can be heard and want to be heard?
Keith, do you want to answer that, or?
At the moment, we're trying to build up their experience. So at the moment, we're looking to work with the London Youth Assembly. So there'll be representation from Merton on that panel and on that board, and then on other Pan-London boards as well. So I would like to think that we can get a youth representative here. But as Keith mentioned, I think it's just building up their experience and confidence, especially when we've had a period of time of working at home virtually.
But I think the young inspectors, as Lola's come today, the young inspectors are a much more confident group. And when there are items on the agenda which they want to speak to, I think that would be a good thing for them to be invited in, if that was okay with members.
That would be fabulous. Thank you very much. Ellie, you had a question.
Mine's more of just an additional answer on that. I think really happy to look at how we get more young people involved in scrutiny, but as I was saying, we have been focused on other areas of youth voice as well. So we do have young people coming to our corporate parenting board who've got experience of being in care. The Children's Trust has young people there. So whilst they might not be here at this political scrutiny meeting, that their voices are being here. But I really like the idea, Keith, of inviting specific young inspectors along when there's an item that's relevant to them, if you're open to that, Sally.
Thank you. Hayley?
Yes, I have a question for Lola, and maybe Kripal as well, if you don't mind. Lola, I'm sure that Chair will mention this later on, but I have to say I thought that you articulated yourself absolutely fabulously. Yeah, so it was very clear. So I just wanted to mention that, but I'm sure some of that will come later on. A question for both of you. If there was something that could happen within the next 12 months, one thing, what would be the one thing that you personally would like to have different in your own community?
Thank you. Sorry, thank you so much for that. I think personally for young people, it's more of support. Where can they find support from? And what type of support and what that support look like? And also, how does that support keep going on? Not like, okay, let's identify myself maybe one day, and then that is it, and nothing else being done, or there's no any follow-up to check on if that young person is okay, or maybe there is more in depth of support that they need, or if there's a different angle that they might want to look into to help them with whatever is going on in their life. So as that's the majority of the issue a lot of young people have is mental health. They're really stressed out. They have a lot of anxiety, and it's more getting worse than it was before. And I think that maybe one area we could focus on. So maybe start working on, if that is possible.
Will Stella, if you could monitor all that, and perhaps we could work with the three of you to make sure that we structure something to follow up. But I don't know if Hayley wants something to add.
But I did ask for each individual as well. I think Kripal wants to mention what his one thing is as well, if you wouldn't mind, Chair. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Lola.
Thank you. As a participation manager, the thing that stuck out for me for the report was that 44% of young people felt they had a say. So it was the other side that didn't. So I'd look to increase that number by increasing the participation engagement pathways and channels that we have here at Merton for young people to have direct access to decision makers. So we're currently exploring that in a lot of different creative ways, but I'm relatively new to Merton, so we're trying to embed that in now. We've got the results and that it's being cascaded out.
Just to have a word with Chair, maybe Keith, you'd like to say what your one thing would be as well in the next 12 months.
They've done really well to say one thing. I'm not very good at saying one thing. I think the thing that struck me most in it, it's not going to be an answer, it's a question, I suppose. I was really struck by food poverty. I was really struck by that information about young people not eating. And the figures are even higher for young carers. So I think, in a sense of one thing that I've thought I need to do is I need to make sure that we find a way to make sure we hear the voices of young carers more.
James wants. James.
Thank you, Chair. Mine's just a comment really to pick up on the two statistics we heard. I agree, the 44% I thought about as well, and the food in particular was really upsetting. And just to make a quick comment to say, Lola, thank you very much for coming along to see us. It can't be very easy, but I agree with what's been said. It's been very helpful for us to understand and to hear directly from you. So thank you and well done for being here. And I look forward to seeing you one day as a member of this council, hopefully. But thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. And Hayley just wanted something else to ask. Can I just say, anyone at home, if you want to ask a question, could you, under the reactions, put your hand up? Because that I then do see rather than you physically putting your own hand up. Thank you.
Keith, just follow up in terms of what you did actually mention before. Has that percentage in terms of food poverty generally increased because of the pandemic? So do you have a comparative figure pre-pandemic? And do we think that that's similar to what Lola was saying in terms of knowing where to go to for help? Is that the same for food poverty also?
And no, I don't think we do have a baseline from young people, because the questions for this survey were written by the young inspectors. So they determined what the questions were. We certainly were aware, I think we're all aware, that during the pandemic, there was a lot of work done around food poverty. There was a lot of families isolating, and a lot of work was done across the community to give food to people. So I think we know that the community hub is the sort of centre for that work, as continuing to do their work now about distribution of food. I know through our youth centres that we spend a lot of our time feeding young people. We have a lot of young people that rely on coming into a youth centre or the children's centre or into the adventure playground for food. So it's still an issue for lots of young people getting good food. We've run the Holidays, Activities and Food programme over the holidays, and that's also making sure that lots of young people on free school meals are getting a proper meal every day. So I think food is definitely an issue, but no, I don't think we have a baseline for that, no.
Has anyone else got any more questions? I don't want this to be dropped here, because obviously a lot of great thought and work's gone into it. So if Stella, I liaise with you, so we make sure that we follow up with the three of you of how we can develop this, or any councillor who's got any ideas, or director for that matter, or how we can further carry this on as a team, because that's the only way forward. But it's been a wonderful presentation, Lola. You are great, I think, an asset, and let's hope you become a bigger asset in Merton. So stay in Merton and help us improve things for young people, please. A thank you to you and to Sir Pal and to Keith for coming. You're welcome to stay, but you're welcome to go too if you don't want to sit through the rest of the meeting. Thank you. Right, we now move on to item agenda 4, which is from Dagmar, the update on the COVID situation in Merton. Thank you, Dagmar.
Good evening, everybody, and thank you, Chair. Because the situation around COVID is moving really fast, I suggest that I give you a verbal overview, and the slides are as your slightly out of date reference. So this time I'm bringing good news. It's really feels different. The reason the slides are out of date is because the infections have actually fallen. The most important in a way indicator is the R value. The famous R is below 1. It means the pandemic is shrinking. Now it still means we've got quite a lot around. So in London, the daily rates of infections are around 8,000. In Merton, about 200 a day, but it's a lot less than at the peak between Christmas and New Year. We still have got numerous outbreaks in schools, but even in the really pressured schools, we've spoken to head teachers recently, it just feels a little easier. So about 40 outbreaks in schools and early years settings, so nobody is yet twiddling their thumbs. Hence, when you look at the distribution of our cases in Merton, it is particularly in children and young people. Recently, you might have heard in the news as well, really more evidence coming out that the disease is mild in children, so that hasn't changed with Omicron. And general hospitalizations are steady or even on the way down. And despite really high infection rates in children over now quite some number of weeks, we haven't seen hospitalization or serious disease in children, which is a real relief. So vaccinations always and will continue to be important. There has obviously been lots of activity before Christmas, including with schools helping to do the 12 to 15-year-olds. Now the vaccination effort is a lot more targeted and bespoke. It means it is slower, but it is very, very focused on reaching into communities that so far have had lower uptake and really tuning in what the individual barriers are. Relevant for children and young people in particular is the 12 to 15-year-old second dose in outside school, the offer. And very importantly for the individual benefit for the individual children is the vaccination offer for the 5 to 11-year-old high-risk children. Now, the numbers are relatively small, but these are children who are at high risk. And hence, it's really, really important that we all help to promote because it's very stressful for the whole family living with children at high risk. So as you hear from my reporting, and you might have heard news earlier, we are now shifting our focus really to think about living safely with COVID, what type of long-term arrangements we need to set in place. And you will have heard in the announcement, the legislation to mandate self-isolation if you're a positive, if you had a positive test, will expire on the 24th of March. So we had that as time frame in our mind. But the Prime Minister today announced that this time frame might be brought forward. And we're expecting to hear the national plans 21st of February. So we are gearing up to be prepared, whatever plans will come out. I think that's in a very potted version, me, and happy to have any questions.
Dagmar, thank you very much for giving us an update, because it isn't easy for everyone to follow. So your interpretation and guidance is much appreciated, and especially the slides you send out to us all, where they're in colour, and we can all much more easily read and see the position of Merton in comparison to our neighbours. Thank you. Has anyone got any questions for Dagmar, please? Anyone joining us via Zoom have any questions? Dagmar, you've been so comprehensive and explained it all so well, and with also your papers in advance. You get off lightly this evening. Doesn't mean you will in the future. Thank you
All
very
right.
much indeed.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Our next item agenda is number 5, which is the Merton Safeguarding Children's Partnership Board Annual Report. Aileen, are you here to give input at all? Carl?
I'm not sure Aileen has joined us. I'm just texting her to make sure she got the meeting invites. I'm just wondering whether Stella can just give a quick update, but I'm texting her as we speak.
I can confirm she did get the invite.
Okay.
Jane, do you have anything you want to bring to our attention, particularly? Sorry, were you saying? Oh, sorry. But while Stella's checking that, and Carl.
So I guess here I was wondering whether, given we are expecting Aileen to come, and I'm wondering whether, given that I can see that Sarah Keane is on the call and Keith is here, whether with your agreement, if we perhaps do the children, people's mental health, we can try and chase where Aileen is, and
quite happy with that. Yes, that's fine. There's no problem with that. So if we go on to now to the next item on the agenda, the children and young people's mental health, which follows on very nicely from some of the issues brought up. Keith, over to you, please.
Thank you. So if I introduce the paper, and my colleague Sarah from the CCG is here as well to talk about this. So the paper does two things, really. It describes the current situation around mental health in young people and presents you with some data about data and feedback that we have about the position around mental health. It updates you on the steps that we've taken collectively with the CCG to develop an I Thrive model in Merton, which is a model which is much more focused on prevention and how we've built services at prevention level in Merton. So the paper goes through the evidence around what's happened. So you've heard today from the young people that mental health is a significant issue for young people in Merton. The CAMS data set, which is basically referrals to the highest level of mental health services in the borough, shows that during the pandemic, they dropped significantly. During lockdowns, have now come back up to a higher level. However, they are still lower in terms of sheer volume than they were pre-pandemic. However, what we've heard at the CAMS board is that the complexity of those young people is significantly higher than before. So we have significantly higher risk around eating disorders, anxiety, tics in particular, suicidal ideation and self-harm. So there's a lot more young people at much higher risk than there were before. And Sarah can talk some more about that if you want to know. What we also have is we have a new service in the borough, which has been with us for a while now, which is called Off the Record. So the information from Off the Record is a sort of a lower level service. So that's where young people can self-refer to that service. And their numbers didn't go down during the lockdowns. They kept going up. And you can see there that numbers are basically double what they were pre the pandemic in terms of volume. So a double the number of young people are being referred through and being supported by them. And their issues are very similar. It's anxiety, issues in the families, peer relationships. So there's lots of issues that they're taking up. So lots of young people are being supported. The other major change I'd want to flag to you is that we've been developing mental health teams around schools. So a government initiative to develop teams around schools. The idea is that 8,000 children per team will have a support service from a mental health support team. And then alongside that, the schools themselves do a project based on how they can support the teachers and how they can support the parents and how they support the young people. It's called the whole school model. The national average for local authority is about 15% of schools having a mental health team. From this Easter, we'll have 100% of schools in Merton being offered a mental health team. So we're in a very, very good position. And that's partly due to the CCG putting extra resources into an extra mental health team for Merton, which is it was a helpful and welcome investment. So the last part of the paper is a draft document, which is almost finished. The last part of this document is it's going to be proofread by the young inspectors, I have to say, just to make sure it all makes sense. And that is a description of services in Merton. So it uses this I Thrive concept idea, and it goes through the services that are available in Merton to support young people at what's called getting advice, getting help, getting more help, and risk support. So it goes through all the services that are available to support young people in Merton, because one of the things I understood members wanted to know was what is available to young people? What is there out there to support young people? So that's a description of what's in the paper. And then I think Sarah, do you want to say anything, or are you going to just answer questions?
No, Sarah, if you can just, anything you want to highlight before we open to questions, please. Thank you.
Thank you. That's lovely. Thank you. So one of the key things I wanted to highlight, I think Keith has mentioned, but I just wanted to mention again, is around the prevention and early intervention that we're really focusing on. So if we look at other areas, a lot of work in terms of other boroughs, a lot of work is going just addressing the complex needs, whereas in Merton, a lot of emphasis is being placed on the prevention and early intervention, whilst, of course, not forgetting some of the needs within our complex children and young people who have very complex needs or need support and complexities of needs. So these are areas we're focusing on. The other thing that I think has been a bit of a challenge for us is around workforce. And workforce, I think nationally, every domain we go into, the narrative or the understanding we are getting is it's been quite difficult sometimes to recruit to the workforce. So some of the things Keith said, we have extended some of the off the record, which provides talking therapy and online sort of counseling. And the challenges they are facing, even within that, is around recruitment. So that was what I wanted to add to it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. If anyone has questions, can you say if they're for Keith or for Sarah? Does anyone have any questions, please? Start. Right, first of all, Hayley.
It's a brief one for Keith. If just because obviously you mentioned about in terms of the report going to the young inspectors, as well as we were talking before about the young inspectors, what does the council do to reward or thank young inspectors?
So the young inspectors are paid employees of the council. So we recruit young people to be young inspectors, and they're on a 1-year fixed term contract, and they're paid for 4 hours a week, and then everything else they do on top of that, they're paid extra for. So they are our employees, and their job is to ensure that we're listening to young people. They're there to help us go out to wider groups of young people. So they are our employees doing that piece of work. 2 of the posts are for care experienced young people out of the 4.
Is there anyone else who has a question? James.
Thank you, Chair. So thank you for the report. It is difficult to read in parts because of the level of suffering that exists anyway in society, but even more so now with COVID. I had two questions. The first is the reference which Keith mentioned in his introduction, but under 2.3, I've underlined the referrals to CAMS decreased during lockdowns, but have now increased, but still lower than pre-pandemic levels. So just a general question, which is, what do we think we might still be missing? I've heard some officers talk about some of the real challenges presented by COVID and potentially very serious problems being missed. So do we have any idea as to what that looks like, and how as an authority we might begin to challenge those who have fallen out of the system, or at least are not in the system now? And then my second question has been partly answered. I was going to say the report is really good at identifying the challenges, as the reports almost always are, but I was struggling to see what the action plan is coming out of those challenges. But the question still stands. I'd be interested in any other comment. But of course, I hadn't appreciated this leaflet, which I did look at. I hadn't appreciated that was new, and therefore presumably that is the answer, is what's come out of the report. But thank you, Chair. Those are my questions.
Keith, do you want to answer? Or
I think on the action plan, Sarah wants to say something about the CAMS action plan.
Right, Sarah, would you like to go first?
Yes, thank you. So we did put it was just, I think, pre-pandemic, we did put a CAMS strategy in place And some of the key areas we wanted to really address are around, sorry, it's not here now, sorry about that. One of the key things we wanted to address was around some of the complexities as we're talking about. So although we're saying that the numbers have decreased or had decreased, what is happening is the complexities has increased. So we have a lot of young people with very complex needs sort of coming into, sorry about this, I have a puppy here who was coming to the room just at this time. Sorry, and I needed to get rid of him. And what is happening is the complexities has increased. So they are still being seen in the service, but the complexities, of course, has changed the way they need to be supported. And that is some of the challenges we're facing. So in terms of an action plan around that, what we're doing is we are increasing capacity in some of our services. So one of the key areas we've increased capacity is for our, what we call the Getting More Help offer, which is what we call tier 3 in old money. According to the iThrive, is Getting More Help. And what we are doing is we're recruiting into that environment. As I said, workforce recruitment is where the challenge is at the moment, but we have been told that they have managed to recruit a number of staff who are going to be starting soon. So we are trying to address the need that way. The other area of challenge is around the eating disorder, which is a national issue. So nationally, eating disorders have sort of increased, referrals within that. And this is across the South London partnership. We have come together and we are working to addressing some of these. And some of the strategy that has been put in place is to increase bed capacity within our Springfield Wisteria ward, as well as doing some pieces of work with our GPs and doing some community input so that we prevent the hospital admission sort of coming forward. So these are some of the strategies we are putting in our actions. The other thing we are working towards is also what we call our front door, which is our single point of access. And what we're doing within that is we're increasing capacity because schools have been mentioning the fact that they do have young people who they think should be referred to CAMS and will be on waiting list or are on waiting list. So we've created a post with an interface between school and CAMS so that they can discuss some of these young children who need support and how best to go about it using some of the service directory that we have included here to signpost where necessary, as well as provide early interventions within that. So these are some of the things we are working towards.
Chair, can I just say quickly that thank you very much, Sarah, for that answer. Chair, I may have, the reason I'm coming back is I want to know which it is. I may have misunderstood the issue that I was raising, or it may be that I didn't ask the question very effectively, although funnily enough, I think the answer might be the same. But my question is, I was concerned that there are a number of young people, given the drop in numbers, who have simply been missed because of COVID. It's nobody's fault, it's just, well, it's COVID's fault. My question was more about what are we doing to identify those young people who may have dropped out of the system or may not be known to us. And as I've said, I've heard officers comment in the past that this potentially is quite a big issue. Now, having hopefully asked the question more clearly, I appreciate the answer may be the same because I did hear about community work, GP work and work in schools. So the answer may well be the same, but I wonder whether perhaps my question, whether I asked my question correctly.
Sarah, do you want to come back on that?
Please, yes, thank you. I think one of the pieces of work we are left, and I think the survey picked up on that as well. I think Lola mentioned children and young people saying they don't know how to access services. And so that's a piece of work that we need to do, which ties into the question you've asked. We want to find out from our young people what are the best ways of advertising the services, especially from the leaflet that we've done. What are the areas that we can enhance so that young people will know where to go to for help and where to access the services. So that's definitely a piece of work that is outstanding for us to continue. I hope that answers the question.
Thank you very much. That combined with what you previously said. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Keith. Did you want to come in?
Yes, thank you. So yeah, to follow up on that, I think there's two parts of those young people which are not in the data in a sense. There is a bit about identification and there's another bit about engagement. So we do know there are some young people that we've identified have issues, but they're struggling to engage in services. So another part of our work is to think, how can we evolve our services so that they are more flexible and they can work in a more more dynamic way to help young people engage, because a clinic-based service may not be the best way to engage with them. So I think that's a challenge for us moving forward, is about coming up with services which are more, where, for example, the worker that knows the young person well might be the one that's supported, rather than, and they then go on and support the young person, rather than the young person directly meeting a clinician. So in the I Thrive model at the risk level, that is a way of working which has been developed in other areas, and so we're trying to develop here. So that's the engagement part. The identification part, I think, is what Sarah answered, which is about we need to help young people see that there are services there for them and find a way of getting that information to them effectively.
Thank you for that, and Chair, thank you, because obviously my second question about how is this report being used, both officers have covered all that as well. So thank you very much.
Nick.
Yes, I apologise in advance for this. This is first of all an old person's question, and secondly quite a complicated one. First of all, I mean, I'm stripping COVID out of this, which is a difficult thing to do. Have the complexities increased, or are we just recognising the complexities better? This is the first question. Second question, do we monitor across groups, for instance, ethnic groups and socioeconomic groups, which certainly we didn't used to do in the past properly? And thirdly, given that there are many constraints now on local government that there used not to be, is the system fully capable of keeping up its resources, both financial and human, with more forensic results? Thanks.
Keith, did you want to take it, or Sarah?
Yeah, I'll start off the answer. So I think the three questions. So the first one's about are the children, are we just finding them, or is it getting more complex? We're certainly getting some increases in some behaviours we haven't had before. So if I pick tics as an example, so we've certainly seen a definite increase in young people displaying tics. And that appears to be a national phenomena. Yeah, we had young people with tics before, but we've got a lot more now. That does appear to be in some way related to social media. So there's a lot more young people seeing each other with tics and then appearing to have tics. So we had an interesting conversation between the lead GP and the lead psychiatrist about this at the last CAMS board, to look at how to support young people with tics. That does seem to be an increase. And the numbers that are admitted to the wards is going up. So that's more young people at a higher level. However, some other things, such as anxiety, it was there and we're finding it. That's a hard one to say, I think. Was it always there and it was masked, and now people are more willing to talk about their mental health and mental well-being? Maybe we're finding it. So I think there's a nuanced answer to that question. The third one was about resources. There was one in the middle, but I've forgotten it.
Sorry, Chair. The one in the middle was about monitoring across socioeconomic groups, yes, and ethnic groups as well.
Yeah, so
certainly we used to underrepresent BME problems.
Yeah, so the data that comes to the CAMS board, and Sarah may say more about this, but the data that comes to the CAMS board does include ethnicity, and it does. I think we can map it by area of the borough. It can't be linked to things like free school meals because that data would be held in education places, but we could certainly do that by school. And certainly, if I recall the last presentation that was done here by a head teacher, she linked information about mental health in her school to issues such as poverty. So I think it is held at a school level and would inform school planning.
Sorry?
The third question about whether the resources are going to be able to keep up. I'm
not sure I'm the right person to answer that question, but anyway, I'll start it. The resource question is certainly there has been increased investment in CAMS over the last 5 years in Merton. There's been an increased investment off the record. It's a new service that we didn't have before. And there's been increased investment in the schools-based work, which we didn't have before. So there has been a significant increase over the last 5 years in mental health services in Merton. Whether that's sufficient and whether it keeps up is another question, but there certainly is there's a move of, I would say there's a move of money from adults to children in that.
Sarah, did you want to come in?
I did, and I thank you. I wasn't sure how to lift my hand, my virtual hand, so I was trying to raise it physically. Thank you for that. One of the areas I wanted to flag up around the resources is, I think nationally, we know that there's an increase within emotional health and mental health needs in all areas. And so the thing that I think has come out very clearly is that we need to work as a system in order to support our children and young people and families. And so working as a system is a very helpful stance that we're taking in Merton. And I think that I Thrive that Keith has spoken about earlier is a conduit in which we want to do that. So we've been working as a partnership to really see how we can galvanize some of the resources we have to work in a way that closes the gaps. And that is what we're doing. Is a key one, I think. Nationally, is everywhere is struggling. So if we come around as a system, then we're able to support it a bit better. One of the other things that I think might be worth noting is, because we are going to become an integrated board, a care system, and then what we call the provider collaborative, hopefully these are some of the things we can work together even further in identifying and supporting our resources, pulling our resources together to support. Thank you.
Thank you. Ed, you had a question?
Thank you, Chair. Probably for you, Keith, actually. Sorry we're getting all the questions. Sarah might jump in. Earlier on, it came up in the video that a lot of people go to friends and family rather than their GP. First, I was going to ask, is that because there's still a problem getting appointments with GPs? I could have asked it then, but it's part of this. These services and agencies are great that we have, but having had 2 young people within my ward that have sadly died in the last year, no doubt as a consequence of COVID and added anxieties, I'm just wondering whether or not there is always that stigma attached with mental health for a lot of young people, especially males, I would presume, to talk about it. And I just wondered if we work with their own, there's a bit of peer support so that they can point them to these services that are available, because unless you're having suffered the devastation of a couple of friends that sadly took their own lives, the first thing you ask is, what could I have done? I didn't see it. And I think it must be for a young person when someone in their class, someone that used to be at school with them, takes their life. I would have thought they'd be saying, well, what could I have done? Should I have done this? And wouldn't it be nice if they could actually point their own friends to these support services as well? I think that'll be enough for Keith to answer.
No, thank you. So absolutely, I think we have a challenge, don't we? This is a professionalised system. On the piece of paper I've given you, that's a very professionalised system. What the young people have fed back to us is that they go to their friends and family, which is kind of what we all do, isn't it? So it's not surprising they've said that, but it's quite good for us to hear it. So the challenge for us now is, how do we have a project to empower young people to support each other? I think that's the next challenge of this, because that's what we've come up from the survey. So I think that is a challenge moving forward, and we will work on how to do that. That's the first answer to that question. The second answer to that question is that the school-based teams, one of the things they're involved in is what you might call the mental health curriculum. So it's helping young people talk about their mental well-being and talk about mental health more openly in schools. And I think that's been in the first initial plans that lots of schools did, it was about what language do we use? How do we help young people talk about this? How do we talk about it as a group of adults and staff together? So I think a lot of the work that's gone on has been talking about how to support staff to talk about their own well-being, and then to transfer that to helping young people too. So I think being able to talk about it, articulate their views, and say how you feel, and being okay about saying how you feel, and that includes men saying how they feel, I think is a big part of moving forward on this. So I think the fact that we've got these schools-based teams, but also the schools work based around the school's plans and the curriculum will help in the long run with that.
Thank you. Sarah, did you, oh, sorry. I just wondered if Sarah wanted to come in, then Ed, if you want to come back.
Yes, thank you. I wanted to follow up on what Keith said, and just to mention the different ways we're trying to engage our young people, because we are aware that the subject matter can be quite stigmatizing in a sense. And so part of the work that Off the Record were doing for us, for instance, was what they call the barbershop outreach. So they were engaging our young people who would sort of go into the barber shops to have a haircut by offering, was a project that they did in the summer. And they will go in there, and through the haircutting, they'll sort of engage that way and signpost. So they have an outreach worker specifically built around outreaching into schools and into the community that way. Thank you.
Ed, I cut you off. Did you want to add anything?
No, thanks, Chair. It was just to say thank you. I'm thanking Keith and forgot to, well, thank Sarah and her as well. Thank you.
Anybody else got any questions at all? At home? Can I say thank you, Keith and Sarah, very much for this detailed report. And I really like the I Thrive concept. I think that's an excellent title. And I think it's something with what the young inspector said, especially Lola coming in and saying, and with this document, it's something we've really got to build on and make sure. And I think it's something, if Stella could note it, we need it to come back to us to see the progress you're making with it. I know that's usually on the agenda. And Jane, to make sure that it's pulled together thoroughly and developed across the borough for our youth and our schools, because as Ed said, he knows, and I lost a friend. I knew there were problems, but I didn't know what to do. It was a long, long time ago, but I just didn't know what to do. And it's something that does stick with you when you feel you failed someone. Thank you very much for that. It was interesting and informative. Carl or Keith, thank you so much. And sorry to Sarah, you're welcome to stay or to go. Thank you. Stella or Carl, have you heard if Aileen's been contacted and can talk to us on agenda item 5?
So unfortunately, I've not had a response to my calls or my SMS messages. So I think between myself and Jane, we will introduce this item, Chair, if that's okay.
Certainly, thank you. Do you want to start, Jane?
Thank you, Chair. So, so I guess the report has sort of laid out for you. The Safeguarding Partnership has had 3 key priorities this year they've been working on. Early help, and as part of that, there's been a lot of work done around looking at our new effective support document. And disseminating that across the partnership. There's also been work around domestic abuse and think family and around contextual safeguarding. And all of those areas are developed and monitored through subgroups of the Safeguarding Board that really sort of drive that work forward and then report it back to the main executive board. You'll also note from the report that the board also coordinates learning from case reviews and then the dissemination of this across the children's workforce. And then there's a section also that looks at sort of training more broadly and the partnership's responsibility around that. And then the only other thing I wanted to flag up is just to note that we have for the Safeguarding Partnership both an independent chair and an independent scrutineer. And the independent scrutineer attends meetings and then takes particular themes and then goes and does some sort of more in-depth sort of research and meeting with the children's workforce across the partnership to explore those themes. And then just to, you may have picked that up on the previous bit of the conversation, but from this year, we also have a young scrutineer, who is one of our young inspectors who works alongside the independent scrutineer, and they've just done their first round of, they meet with each of the executive partners and the chair to plan their work, but also to feedback what they're finding from the conversations they're having. And they also attend all of the subgroups of the safeguarding board between themselves and then feed that back. So I don't know if you wanted to add anything, Carl.
Yes, I was going to ask Carl, do you want to come in at all?
Thank you. Not really. Just to, and it's always a slightly funny one doing this annual report, because the reporting year that this actually covers ended almost a year ago. So just to remind that the scope of this report was from 20 to 21. So it's always a slight delay for these reports to come here. But obviously since then things have moved on, and we'll be kind of coming back with the annual report for this year shortly as well. So that would be the only thing I wanted to add.
I'm probably sorry, Chair. The other thing that I should have mentioned is, of course, Aileen is the chair of both the adults and the children's safeguarding partnerships. So the other thing that we have been developing is some pieces of joint work, and our conference this year is going to be a joint conference looking partly at transitions, but also at other shared work that we have. So that has also been a really, a really important development over the last 12 months in terms of that link across children and adults.
Does anyone have any questions, please? And if you can say who it's for. James first, then Hayley.
Thank you, Chair. Can I just ask a quick clarification? The lady who hasn't joined us this evening, is she an officer in your team, or is she an external?
No, she's external. She's an independent chair. So we have the executive is made up of an independent chair, and then myself, and then a senior manager from health and a senior manager from the police, all of whom are decision makers within that partnership. And so I don't know how we've lost Aileen this evening, and hopefully she's okay, because I know she's already been to the adults board to talk about the adults report. So yes, she's not an officer of the council, she's an independent chair.
I picked that up right at the end of your presentation. I'm glad I did, because I was about to launch into say I was disappointed, but if she's not one of your team, then I appreciate it slightly different. So thank you for the report. The challenge for me was that there's a lot of detail here, but what's missing, and I was hoping we might get it in the introduction, is it would have been really helpful to understand from officers your views of this report, the strengths, the weaknesses, the concerns, the almost like a SWOT analysis, because it makes it very difficult to do anything really other than ask factual questions, which is what I'm about to do, unless we have a feel for what you as an officer team think of this report. I mean, to be fair to the director, I've been saying it for years, so you're not the first person I've said it to. So I'll have to ask factual questions, because I don't know what you really think of this report. Page 8, there's reference to repeat. The diagram talks about repeat cases. So my question is, and I understand that would be to be expected, but that must be a concern. And is that something that does concern you? And does it suggest that strategies to prevent repeat cases are not working? Does it suggest that? But I also appreciate it could equally suggest that they're just the most challenging cases. There's reference on page 13 to more boys than girls being affected, and I wondered why that was. But interesting, there's also reference to we in Merton tend to have these cases, these referrals, when young people are a bit older than in other boroughs and in the national average, I read. So I was quite interested in that. And then my final point as to why we think that is. And my final point was a few years ago we had challenges in the borough about recruiting foster carers, and I thought that had improved a little bit, and perhaps it has, but this report indicated to me that it's still challenging. Presumably, ideally, we would like to keep people in borough if we can. Thank you, Chair.
So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do some, and then I might bring D. Raj in, because he might want to comment on that, because I think the page 13 is relating to our children in care, isn't it? Yeah. So I suppose firstly, to respond to your first bit, which is about our response to it, it's not a, so in a sense, it's not a local authority report, it's a partnership report. So we would, as an executive partnerships, that's health, police, and the local authority, we would look across the year at what's happening. So I don't know that. So I guess we would, as a partnership, tend to focus on the things we're more concerned about or the things we want to move forward. So we're really pleased as a partnership about the work on early help. We really feel that's moved forward. There's been real engagement across the whole of the children's workforce on that, on the effective support sort of document we've put in place, and real good engagement around the training. So that we feel that's been a real area of success across the partnership. To pick up on the domestic abuse and think family, so I think, yes, we are concerned when there's repeat cases. Yes, it does mean across the wider partnership, and of course that isn't just children's workforce colleagues, that's also colleagues across adult services, across community safety, across, yes, we would be disappointed if we would expect there to be some repeat cases, but we also look at this across Safer, Stronger Executive Board, across obviously the Violence Against Women and Girls subgroup. So it's looked at in a number of places to look at that, and it is a real focus in terms of support around that. Then I'm probably going to hand over to Dheeraj just to probably say a little bit about our children in care cohort and the foster carers, saying yes, it is still challenging around recruiting foster carers, and that is again an area of focus for us in the local authority.
Dheeraj, would you like to come in now, please?
Thank you, Chair. So the first question was about our proportion of boys to girls. Could you remind me of the second question, please?
Problem. There was quite a lot. So yes, about boys and girls, and then there was reference in the report to, and I'll see if I can find it. It's on page 13, but to young people. Let me see if I can find it rather than guessing. Oh, thank you. Yes, thank you very much. So on page 13, where children are placed into foster care, there's a trend of more children being placed into foster care outside the borough than in the borough. Well, that's one bit of it, but there's somewhere about them being a little bit older, that when placed into foster care in Merton, that they tend to be a bit older than in other boroughs, or indeed nationally.
It's in the third paragraph, so it's the second sentence. You're absolutely right, Councillor. It says that proportionately more Merton children enter care at a later age when compared to London and national averages. So there is something there that the data suggests in terms of a delay on entering care. In terms of age.
I'm more interested. I can understand the difference between boys and girls, but I'm more interested in that second point as to why we think that is the case, that they tend to be older here.
Thank you, Councillor. So the point about the boys and girls, I think, is that so the first point I would make is that numbers of children looked after in Merton is relatively low. So when you have a cohort of about 130 children being looked after, we're talking numbers differentiating sort of 5 to 10 at the most. And I think that changes nationally, but I'm aware from other local authorities that the trends tends to be that boys are more likely to be looked after in certain situations, in certain age cohorts, and that might be because of behaviour challenges. That means that the local authority has to step in where parents are struggling to manage that. With regards to the young people, increased numbers, in some respects, that's to be seen as a positive, because what that demonstrates for us is that more early intervention and support is keeping younger children out of care. And that's right, we should be doing that. And the more we work on that, our age population of our looked after children will change. So over the course of 10 years, you will see more of an aging looked after population. So those are the 2 points I would raise. The other point I would make as well is that actually in Merton over the last year that I'm aware of, certainly since taking up this post, there's been a lot more focus and attention being provided to contextual harm. And the more focus we provide to contextual harm, there's always going to be a consequence around how we safeguard and protect some of those young people. On some occasions, that does mean that we have to step in as a corporate parent to try and safeguard them. So those would be my reasons, I would say. In terms of the question mark about foster carers, as Jane's put it, yes, that is a challenge. That's something that we've presented to this panel in the past. I know that there's some work going on through our corporate parenting board. We've launched the Mockingbird constellation. We're looking to launch a second constellation later this year. And what that'll do over the course of the next year is really help drive the reputation and help us pull more of our community in their interests to look after our children. So that's an ongoing piece of work that we're involved in.
Thank you, Chair. Can I just check? Thank you for that answer. That was really helpful. Can I just check my understanding of one bit? And if I have understood it, then it's really good news. Were you saying that because of policies that are proving effective, if young people are going into foster care, it tends to be later than the national average because the strategies have proved effective, keeping them out of foster care for longer? Is that? I mean, that's great. If that's really good news, if that's what you meant. I just wanted to ask if I'd understood you correctly.
No, so the point I was making was that actually you'll have an aging population of children in foster care if we're managing to reduce the number of younger children coming into foster care because of our interventions. So the better interventions means our children under the age of 10, certainly children under the age of 5, entering foster care is lower. And as a result, as we're lowering that number, our proportion of older children will increase over time. So because they're getting older in foster care.
So yes, it is a positive in terms of the interventions for the younger children. That's right. And as a consequence of that, you will inevitably, you're probably going to see older children are the ones that are more likely to come into care. Yeah.
Thank you. That sounds really, really good news and very positive. And Chair, just to finish off, obviously the foster carers is an issue. It's been an issue for many years. Are the strategies that have just been talked about, Mockingbird, I heard, are they working? Is it a trend that is gradually improving, or is it still the challenge? I mean, 3 or 4 years ago, it was a massive challenge here, wasn't it?
Yeah, so I think it's early days on the Mockingbird, and as Diraj says, we're hoping to bring in a second constellation of that. So we're hoping that will over time make a difference. And the other thing that we've just also been thinking about is we clearly need to go and do a sort of major recruitment piece of advertising again. And again, we've done that in the past, and it does make a difference. If you're doing, and it's timing it. If you're doing it all the time, it becomes sort of almost like background that nobody sees. So so we are again planning to do a sort of big recruitment drive around that. The other thing that has impacted, and I think there's a comment on that in the later data section, is that we do actually have quite a lot of foster carers, potential foster carers in the system at the moment, but it has taken longer to do that, partly because of the COVID situation, and things that would have speeded through have taken longer. But so there are a number in the system. So we're hoping we're suddenly going to see quite a big improvement in that.
No, thank you. That is in the report. Yeah, we've seen. Hayley.
Thank you, Chair. It's probably a question for you, Jane, but I do recognise that some of this will probably been responded by Aileen, so I'll just take it as it is. So if I actually refer to the start of the last heading on page 17, which talks about the impact of our training programme, and I do recognise this is a year prior. So it talks about offering a total of 480 training places and really keys out an attendance rate to 79%. However, if you actually look at 222 attendance based on a total of 480 places, that's actually an attendance of 46%, not 79%, okay, of the total of the places that were actually offered there. And then, well, crucially, it goes down a couple of paragraphs later. It talks about our most well-attended courses, remembering that this is an impact of a training programme. It doesn't actually say where the impact actually is. It talks about attendance or statistics. And then it goes about the most well-attended courses. And I think if you actually to look at an annual training programme, you should also look at the most least attended training programs. So if you actually look at the table, which is on page 19, the least attended training programs are exploitation and gangs, the impact of weapons and criminality on young people, also the impact of potential mental illness on children, of parental mental illness on children and young people. The fourth is a use of social media and impact on adolescents. And the other smallest attendance is what is sexual violence virtual training. And I think that in terms of for an evaluation, and because the evaluation doesn't go into anywhere near enough depth in terms of what the training program would look like for the next year, particularly in terms of, why is attendance low on some of those crucial training packages? And I think it's just really clear, and it just didn't really strike enough impetus for me that it was an evaluation nor an impact analysis within this section of the report on training. And then my second, I know that was quite detailed, I do apologise, was just with Aileen not being here. And then the second one that I wanted to mention was any of this virtual now, or will these training courses be, because I know a lot of the council courses have gone on to Zoom. Are people aware that they are on Zoom, or do they still think that they need to go in person, and there will that attendance then increase? Thank you, Chair.
So Elizabeth is going to come in and answer this, because actually she's been part of the subgroup that has been actually looking at the training program. So she'll be able to give you probably more detail around that.
Hayley, your point about the impact section on this, we want to improve the way that we gather our information about how the training is impacting on those who attend. It was, I think, a little bit of a challenge during the pandemic. We do seek to gather feedback from the training. We didn't get an awful lot of feedback, particularly during the pandemic. So the policy and training subgroup of the partnership is looking at how we can encourage that feedback, and whether that's formal through, as I said, sort of sending people emails afterwards and asking them to respond, or informally through the representation on the subgroup, because we have a representation from across the partnership. So I very much hope that we are going to be able to show more impact when we come to our next report for the following year. The majority of training now continues to be on Zoom or virtual, and participation in that training has improved over the past year. So the 21-22 situation around participation there, and partly that is because, as you know, people are more able to access that training virtually than actually coming in person. So that is good news.
Are there any more questions from anyone? Joan.
Thank you, Chair. Okay, this question is for anyone. It's not in your report, but a few days ago, I read and I learned that 2 of our young people went missing. And even today, I read in the news they haven't been found. So I just want to find out, what are we doing to, support? Are we supporting the parents? And what activities are we involved in, trying to find these young people back? And what are the process around this? And do you know anything about it?
So is it children missing? So they're missing for a period of time, Joan? Is that what you're? Yeah. And today they still aren't. Okay. Okay, so it would, I mean, and Diraj may want to come in. It would normally be a multi-agency response to a child going missing. So we would be working with the police. We might have slightly different pathways if the child was already known to us, and might be in our care, or may be open to a social worker, than if they weren't. We also have children who might go missing in our borough, but are found in our borough, who come from another borough, and there's a slightly different process for that. But there are multi-agency processes in place that track all of those children, and also track whether they are missing more than once or repeatedly, and again a different process for that. Diraj, did you want to come in and sort of expand on that?
Thank you, Jane. So absolutely, as Jane's put it, so we've got a multi-agency, it's called a MACE panel, so the Multi-Agency Child Exploitation and Missing Panel, which is jointly chaired by a senior officer from the council as well as the police, and they meet on a regular basis. So there's a strategic panel and then an operational panel that meets monthly, and where there's an urgent need. So if there's a particularly concerning case of a missing young person, there's an opportunity to meet more urgently than that. And these are the right forums where our multi-agency partnership comes together. We review all our records. We think about what do we know about these children, their families, their support networks, their social networks, and there's a range of activities and actions that can arise and come out of those multi-agency settings. So, for instance, we may do a social media sort of alert. The police may do door-to-door stops. Social workers may make phone contact if, as Jane says, the case is open to children's social care. So there's a range of activities that go on in those situations and in those cases.
Sorry, Chair, is it possible when these children are found, you know, we have something in the report to say something about it? And, you know, because for me as a parent, and I think other parents, and, you know, it's something that we really consider to be, you know, something that we want to know about, and not only hearing it from the media.
Just come in, is it what you're saying you want reported figures on children in Merton who've gone missing, how long they're missing for, and what methods you've used to track them?
We certainly have reporting on those figures generally from those overview groups. So we could look at providing some of that, so you get a feel for what the kind of numbers are and how frequently that's happening. I think we can do that from the MACE panel has a set of data, doesn't it, Diraj, that we could have a look at whether we could pull something from that to kind of just, you know, exemplify what happens.
Do you just want to comment on that?
We can certainly go away and look at that data. Just mindful that there's a lot of police information that comes in, and often it's the police reports because the first agency that's contacted is the police, and rightly so. So we could certainly look at what data we can provide and perhaps bring some information. Yes, we can take that away and have a think about that.
Thank you very much. That's lovely. Has anyone, Thomas?
Thank you, Chair. This might be another one again to go away and come back on, but on James's point about the fostering out of borough, is there data about sort of how out of borough that is? I mean, are we talking sort of over borough boundaries in the sort of next door boroughs, or children from Merton having to go further afield for foster care? And then, so bouncing about a bit, but the page 10 talks about sort of criminal exploitation of young people and county lines, but it only refers to the growth since 2016. I just wondered if anyone could provide a bit more information, if there's anything more up to date on how that's changed in sort of more recent years. I appreciate, you know, the information in the paper says it's risen since 2016, but just in terms of anything more recent on that. Thank you, Chair.
So in terms of the first bit of information, yes, we do have information about where all of our children are fostered. That comes to the Corporate Parenting Board as a kind of map that shows where they are, and the vast majority are sort of in neighbouring boroughs, so are not very far away, but we do have some children obviously who for various reasons might be further away, but there is a map that shows that, and we certainly could include that in one of the reports in the future, just so you get kind of feel for where our children are. And we also, to the Corporate Parenting Board, report the percentages within a certain number of miles and beyond that. So we certainly could provide that. In terms of county lines, so again, that would be looked at as part of the contextual safeguarding work that the subgroup of the Safeguarding Board does. So there will be an update. So when we could, and that will definitely come into next year's report. I don't know if I can give you data off the top of my head now in relation to that, but we certainly could go away and we could provide you with that, some update on that. And also I just wanted to reassure Hayley that we'll go away and look at the mathematics that don't appear to be correct in that report. Carl may have had time to do that already, but probably not. So we will just go and check that out for you. Oh, Carl looks like he is going to come in.
Yeah, I can come in. So what the report says is that there were, I think, 480 places offered. 228 people, 282 people turned up. Were booked on, and 222 attended. So I absolutely take your point, Hayley, in terms of making that slightly more clearly. But that 79% relates to 222 out of 282. The wider point that we're making actually is that there were way more places that were technically on offer that people could have attended in the partnership that were free of charge. So there is something there, but the attendance rate, and I don't want to split head, you know, if you look at the attendance rate between those who booked on and those who attended, that is 79%. But you're right, in the way it's written, I can understand how we need to make that clearer.
Carl, I think that all the information is actually within the report. It's just, again, it's just making things look a little bit more rosy than they are. So to say that, so you've got a certain amount of people have booked and then so many attended, that's a bit, it's not quite accurate really. And I think that it's just focusing on in terms of the ones which were the most popular as well. And I just think the whole section just needs a thorough review, in my opinion.
Carl, could we in future then perhaps the total offer of courses on offer, the numbers that were applied for and the numbers that actually attended, so 3 sets of figures put side by side for clarity?
That's absolutely fine, and that's what we're trying to do in that sentence. I do take the points being made.
Right, thank you very much. Are there any other questions on this section? Right, thank you. Thank you very much for taking over and delivering the very detailed report. And Stella, could we write to Aileen and thank her for the report she submitted? Thank you. So you got another question? Sorry.
It'd be nice to actually know if Aileen is okay, because we're expecting her this evening. I know she's not. It's okay, thank you.
Yes, the thought did go through my mind.
Yeah.
Something might have been a hiccup somewhere, but yes. Thank you, Stella. Right, if we move on to homeschool travel consultation, which I know has been an issue of concern with certain members and is a very informative document. And Tom, thank you very much for this document. We have read it and gone through it, marking it. So I'm sure there are questions for you, but are there any comments you'd like to make before we open up to questions? And could you put your speaker on, your mic on, please? We can't hear you.
Yeah, sorry, I pressed mute, but clearly missed the button. Can you hear me now? Can you still not hear me?
We can hear you, yes.
You can hear me, sorry. Yes, so yeah, I think the report speaks for itself. We had a very rich consultation, as the report says, of 155 people responding on a questionnaire, but much more richly, we had 5 meetings, 2 of which with Kids First parents, 3 of which we went into schools, Cricket Green, First Aid and the Rains Park Arc, and got some really good responses from that. As a result, the direction of travel really seems to be towards independent travel being promoted more widely, where it does seem to be established that we're not doing as much as we can do on that, but very much keeping to support those that need travel support most. But really encouraging the independent travel more and encouraging where people do want it, personal travel budgets. So that's really the crux of a sort of quite a long report with a lot of details, but I won't go into any more detail. I'll leave the time for questions.
Are there any questions from Tom from the floor? James, please.
Thank you, Chair. So I agree with what you said at the beginning, Chair. It is a very thorough report and very detailed. So thank you very much to officers for putting this together. My question, it may be for the cabinet member or for Tom. I just wanted to take a step back, and obviously this is a piece of work that needed to be done, and we've talked about it in this panel for a number of years. But I was struck when reading it that potentially it's actually harsher than recommissioning, and obviously if there are young people who want to travel independently, that's fantastic. But I would hope there had been previous. I keep looking up there, but it's there, isn't it? The camera. So looking at you both. If people want to travel independently, that's obviously fantastic, and for many people a travel budget would be more appropriate. But I wondered if, which is why I'm saying it may be a question for the cabinet member, if maybe you could just go back to the beginning and just explain how that fundamental decision was made, because what I had assumed we were going to try to do is keep the service, but shift the burden of responsibility to the party that won the tender or who we commissioned to deliver it. And what I've said over the years, and this may not be practical, is that can we not have a fixed cost rather than being constantly hampered by these variable costs? Can we not have a fixed cost which we then put out to tender, and then after that it is up to the contractor to provide the service? That's what I thought we were going to do, and I'm interested to see that we've gone in what may appear to be a slightly harsher direction of actually withdrawing the service from some people and replacing it with either training for independent travel, which absolutely is appropriate in many cases, or a travel budget, which again may be appropriate in many cases. So my question was sort of that fundamental one, which is why have we gone down the route of withdrawing the service from a number of people rather than recommissioning and seeking to put that burden on a provider? Thank you, Chair.
Tom, would you like to come in on that, please?
Yeah, I mean, let me reassure you that that commissioning is going on. Commissioning is taken very seriously, and we're doing everything we can to get absolutely value for money. I mean, your specific suggestion, James, if I rightly say, to take out the variable isn't really practical when it is a variable, because to any contractor would have to price the fact that they don't know which children are needing to be transported to which school on which year. So it is something that actually you get better value for money from making that variable, so you don't actually have that risk transferred. But we do have done a lot of work over a number of years and continue to be as efficient as possible by commissioning as wide a number of providers as possible, have a mixture of in-house provision, so our own buses, and where it's more efficient to do so, and when you're going to schools which there are less children going to the taxi service, and trying to get those providers as wide as possible. And we've done a lot of work to ensure that wherever possible children can travel. I mean, if I just give you an example, this year where we did a review and we got the utilisation of the buses, we're quite clear that we can demonstrate, we say £300,000 just compared to between the July and the September, an equivalent of clearly against a rising number. But if we hadn't done that piece of work by making sure, having a thorough review to ensure that every seat was taken properly as well as possible on journeys, we'd be paying for £300,000 more. So no, the commissioning has been sorted, and we could certainly provide more information on that. But the reason why we're doing this consultation is clearly we needed to consult on the outward facing element. Hence, we were talking to people on those specific sums, while the commissioning, I guess, goes on as efficiently as possible in the background.
We have questions from Ellie or is it a contribution? Yeah, if you want to come in there, Ellie, and then Nick afterwards.
Thank you very much. Not a question, but yeah. So as Tom said, James, they've got an issue here of rising numbers of children and young people and the rising costs. And very much what we're not doing is trying to decommission any of the services. What we're doing is saying, okay, let's look at these policies that hadn't been looked at for a number of years, and the circumstances have changed quite a lot over those years. And let's check those policies as fit for purpose as possible, so that the right young people who need travel support provided directly to them. We know exactly who they are. We understand their needs. And then, as Tom said, we do all that work on making sure we're commissioning that as well as possible, as efficiently as possible. But then for these other children where actually there's more flexible range of options, taking a proper look at, well, you know, are we not only are we not advertising these enough, but do we need to invest more in these? Is there actually a kind of best to save argument around putting more money into independent travel training, which improves the lives of those children and young people whilst delivering these? So both are very much so that the bird's eye view that you invited us to take, both are very much going on. They're two halves of the same problem, but this consultation was specifically about people's views on the policies and the eligibility.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Chair. I wish we had done it before. It has been a number of years that I've suggested at this panel we do it, but I think it is a really good piece of work, and I think the flexible approach must be good. And I do appreciate it's much easier for me to suggest that we put the risk on another party than it is for Tom and officers, or indeed yourself as cabinet member, to actually get somebody to take that risk up. I do accept there's a difference there, so I understand how that's not easy. And then the final comment I would make, but I know this will happen. We had to do it. We had to look at this. There had to be savings. The fact that Tom has identified one shows that we perhaps could and should have looked at this before. But it's good that we have. I think it's a really good report, and so I commend everybody involved. But of course, the actual decisions now need to be professional ones, don't they, in terms of where it is appropriate for it to be independent travel or for it to be budget. Or so having done the policy bit of it needed to be looked at, and Tom and others having done that detailed work to come up with this package, I hope and I'm sure that it will now be a professional decision on the ground as to where it's applied. Thank you, Chair.
Tom, did you want to come in at all on that, or are you happy to take another question?
I think it was a statement, but yes, just to agree with James on that matter. Absolutely. Point taken.
Nick.
Yes, thank you very much, Chair. It's just halfway between a comment and a question, really. It's about independent travel training. And it's to do with being very, very old and remembering how this came up first 10, 15 years ago as a potential way of saving money. I actually put it to the head teacher of Cricket Green at that point, that the council was thinking of saving money by travel training. And I've not seen her shout quite so much as I saw her shout on that particular occasion. Travel training is an education. It's first and foremost something for children to learn, for them to gain their independence. And the fact that it can save us money, as it says on 3.5 of this, should be a secondary consideration for us. I think that's really, really, really important. I know that it's going to make a difference. Of course it'll make a difference. I'm glad that it's going to make a difference. We've been looking at this budget for years, but it's really, really, really important that we see it not as a saving, but as an educational tool. That's really all I have to say about it. Is that how it's going to work?
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more, Nick. Yes, whilst it does have the potential to save money, it is life-changing, positive. As part of the consultation, it really was quite warming, where you actually met some of the children who had been travel training. So both Queen's Park and Green, we spoke to those that had been travel training, and it really was life-changing. So proud of themselves to be able to catch the bus and move independent. So yes, it does. Clearly, it's going to cost less money for a child to travel independent. But yeah, we're very much that's that view you said. It is actually for the benefit of the child and their family as they grow up, much as anything.
Tom, are there any questions from anyone else? Jane, do you want to add?
So I just wanted to add to the bit that Tom had said and really responding to Nick. So I guess one of the things about the head teacher at Cricket Green is she's absolutely committed to ensuring that the young people in her school have all the opportunities to be travel trained. That's a key part of it. I don't know that we could say that that is absolutely on the curriculum of every school. So actually what this will do is that, we'll start to be, actually our expectation would be this is part of the plan that children are doing. Actually, not only is it that we would commission the travel training, but would be expecting that as part of what would be offered from a number of the other schools that our children go to. So building on that good practice.
If it's very quick, of course.
Back on something that Councillor Draper said, that it does need to be both, though. I mean, the reality is, I said in my comments that I hope that having done the policy work, that the on the ground decisions are professional and in the interest of each individual. So I agree with that. But we can't ignore the massive DSG gap. We can't ignore the financial pressures. So it does. Unfortunately, the reality is it does have to be a bit of both. But the on the ground decision is the last one, which is what is in the interest of the pupil. You've told us all evening how old you are. Maybe that's why you were thinking it didn't need to include the money. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. But I think I found it extremely interesting to read, and it's essential that all our children are catered for. It is our legal duty to educate them and to get them to the school of their choice. And I like the idea of training them to be independent. And it's interesting of where they're giving independent travel training, 36% are worried about getting lost or getting off at the wrong stop. And I have a goddaughter who does that. If she's got off at the wrong stop, she cannot self-right, but she knows to ring her mother, and her mother goes to get her. But her mother supports that independent travel because she knows her daughter has to make that step. Most of the time it's fine, but they have to practice. It is a difficult one, but all these children do deserve to have whatever travel arrangements they need to support their education. But you're quite right, we've got to make sure it's run efficiently. And I think Tom's report has shown how detailed and carefully they're looking at everything. But you're still saying, James, that the cost of whoever is commissioned to take on this work, you want that looked at in more detail? Is that what you're saying?
No, I don't think so, Chair. Thank you. No, I mean, the cabinet member has commissioned this, and I thank her for doing that, and officers have looked at it, and I trust the judgment of officers. So no, I don't need anything to be looked at again. The point, as much as I don't like making them, the point is more of a political one to Nick and to you, which is the reality is we can't ignore the money. I mean, that we can't. There's a £37 million deficit. We can't ignore it. Regrettably, it will be a factor in decision making, but it doesn't change the other comment I've made, which is at the end of the day, it has to be an on the ground decision made by a professional about an individual who they know as to what is best for them. But both you and Nick have made the comment of, we've got to put the children first. Absolutely, but we can't ignore the financial position. And we've heard this evening, savings that have been identified that perhaps could and should have been identified years ago, and here in front of us. I mean, we can't help it. I know we are hampered by requirements, but I mean, on page 59, those are independent schools. So we're paying a fortune to independent schools, then paying a fortune again to deliver the kids to those independent schools. That's not our fault, but it is a real challenge that as a society we need to get our heads round as to whether it's right that local authorities bear the full burden of these 20, 30, 40, I mean, on the very odd occasion, £100,000, but clearly that's for young people with acute needs. And then we're also paying to deliver them to these independent schools too. So these are the sorts of things we've got to also get our heads round. But I appreciate that's not for tonight, and it's certainly not a problem unique to Merton.
And thank you for that, James. But it is something that's been repeatedly said at meetings that we're trying to provide more in-borough provision. But if a parent has a right of choice, and I'm sure Jane will come in with the details, a parent has a right of choice of school. And if they decide the most suitable school is outside the borough and somewhere else, because some children have very complex needs, then the funding for their education and the funding for their travel is down to Merton. And it's our legal duty to do that. And as much as possible, we are trying to move in-house. Jane, did you want to come in on that?
Yes.
Just before Jane does, you're right, and there's a huge piece of work to do that. So I agree with you. Sorry.
So I guess just clarifying, so parents have a right to state a preference even within this system, but we would be looking, so if a parent was saying, you know, I'd like my child to be placed in a provision that's quite a long way away, and we know we've got a provision in borough that can provide the same, then we would be steering them towards that. But you're right, within the process, they have the option to be stating where they would like us to consult with. But as part of that process, it's not just I can choose to send my child here. One of the things, obviously, in terms of providing more provision in borough, is that the more we have of our own provision, the less likely we'll be to actually look at that alternative independent provision because we haven't got enough places.
To implement that. Hayley, and then Nick.
Yeah, Jane just asked him a question because a parent has the right for a preference but doesn't have a right to choose. It's a fundamentally big, it's a big difference between the two, really. They can't say that they want to go to a school which is 50 miles away because they like the school when there is one in borough. You know, it is a preference, and obviously those preferences are considered, I expect, by the council. But you answered the question already.
Yes,
so
yes,
there is no question.
It has to meet the needs of the children.
Yeah.
I'm not going to talk to the preference of schools, but what we do in special needs schools is we do our best to actually train children to become adults in society, to become independent, to get jobs, etc., etc., etc. And in some of our schools, to stay out of prison, etc., etc. And all those things do actually save money. They do save money. If you have somebody working as opposed to sort of claiming off the state and living, all these things, of course they save money. But that's not why you do it. You do it because it's the right thing to do. You do it because you're actually teaching your children to be independent, to be self-reliant. And that's always got to be the point where we start from. And I understand it, James. I mean, we've been arguing on the same thing for years, but it is that question of degree of where you start from. And you need, I think, in this case, to start with the children rather than with the budget.
Tom, as you undertook responsibility for this, is there anything you want to come in with to conclude?
No, just obviously that's very useful discussion. Thank you very much. And yeah, I mean, we are looking forward to sort of bring it forward. We are going to have some more discussion on our ideas on development first before we get forward to Cabinet in March.
Tom, can I say thank you very much to you and everyone involved in this. Oh, sorry, there's another question. Dennis.
Thank you, Chair. I'm sorry I haven't been involved in this meeting, but I must give a bit of history here. I don't know whether my long-term colleagues, either as councillors or officers, remember when Sue Evans was the director, we were called to a meeting, the ones on the Education Committee, I think it was then, I don't know, to discuss it. And there was lots of talk about how we afford the transport. And we had to obviously recoup the money that we were overspent, but also make it viable. And I think I remember saying to him, because I was, at the time, I was chair of Friends in St Helier, and Friends in St Helier got together with the Mitcham and Morden Guild and Wimbledon Guild. And we'd done a survey with the elderly the year before on exactly the same subject, because the elderly have to pay, they have to pay a share anyway, and we had to put our costs up. But the idea was I went on 2 journeys as a helper on a transport from Wimbledon Guild. And yes, it's fine getting a child home from school, 15, 20 minutes. But in this particular instance, the last person off the bus had been on the bus for 1 hour and 50 minutes. And that happened on 2 occasions that I went on the rides. Now, I don't know about you, but if we actually cut costs, the only way we're going to be able to afford borough transport is to get more people on the same bus, which means, unfortunately, the last person getting off is going to be on there a long time. And is that acceptable?
Thank you, Dennis. I understand exactly what you mean, having done an escort duty with older people. 3 hours was the longest. Has anyone else got anything to add?
Can I just commend Nick, and I'll definitely miss him not being on the council. Well, assuming I make it back, I'll definitely miss him not being on the council, and I respect him for jumping in the deep end. And I thought this evening's argument of supporting costs on travel so as to save the nation prison costs later in life, I thought that was one of his best ever. So I'll definitely miss him.
There you are, ladies and gentlemen, entertainment value as well. Tom, thank you so much, and please thank everyone involved in this report, and to the cabinet member and to the Director of Education, Jane, and to Elizabeth for all you've done to put it in. Thank you. I found it was really interesting to have. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. If we can move on to agenda by item 8, the Director's report, please.
Okay, Chair. So in this report, you'll see the first bit we talk about is the survey of children and young people, and we did that at the beginning of the meeting so that it would enable our young inspector to be able to go and carry on with her evening. So we've touched on that one, and obviously it also referenced the transport consultation, which we've had a good conversation about. So last time, members of this panel asked for some update on the school place strategy. So we've included some information on that and around the latest schools admission consultations for your information, the usual update about EHCPs. And then I just wanted to draw your attention to the last section, which is about school attendance. So the DFE are very interested, but we are also very interested in what is happening around attendance at the moment. So that is, for me, one of the areas of concern that we have, that although children are back in school, attendance is still not back to where it was pre-COVID. So we're doing some quite concentrated work looking at all those children, particularly our most vulnerable children who are open to children's social care or who are open to our targeted family wellbeing service. So that's at our targeted early help level, to look at those that are not in school and see what we can do together as partners to get them back into school. Because although the attendance overall for us is higher than the national, but still not where it was before, we remain concerned about the fact that for vulnerable children that is lower than it is for children overall. So it was just to, I guess, reassure you as a panel, we are focusing on that and doing some quite concentrated work. And so Keith led a whole day's worth of meetings with heads of service from children's social care, going through all of those cases where we were concerned and putting a plan in place for each of those children.
Are there any questions on the report, please? James.
Thank you, Chair. So on attendance, thank you very much for addressing that. I think, as I've said before, we know there are going to be challenges everywhere in every borough of every political persuasion. The key is, have we identified them and are we doing something about them? And you have, and you are. So thank you for that. The other thing I wanted to talk about was the school places strategy, and I appreciate this was all well before you joined the authority, and in fact well before a lot of the officers involved joined the authority, and obviously the current cabinet member. But I was a bit surprised to read this because we always knew years ago that there was a bulge, but we also knew it was a bulge. So we knew that this would come out the other side, and it is. And tonight we're sort of reduced to you assuring us that there are no plans for school closures. And I appreciate that's at the moment as opposed to forever. But
I just wondered, and it is difficult for officers to comment because I appreciate that it was a political decision, and I appreciate it's difficult for the cabinet member to comment when she wasn't a member of the authority or a cabinet member at the time. But looking back, I think we spent about £100 million on expanding schools. And I just wonder whether perhaps with the benefit of hindsight, whether we might have gone down the line of the sixth forms, for example, and the buildings that we were put in for those, which I gather last 50 years, but they're described as temporary. And I just wonder whether, with the benefit of hindsight, we might have done this in a slightly different way, and whether you have any comments on that, because the reality is we have spent £100 million on extensions and new buildings and things, which we knew at the time were only going to be used for a limited period of time.
So
It's possibly, sorry, I'm sorry.
Tom
It's
on the
possibly.
call.
Do you want me to answer that one? Yeah.
Do you want to start?
No, well,
Yeah.
I do know, and I wasn't going to say that, Tom. I do know you were here at the time, and I was not going to highlight that. But it was a I mean, you've executed an amazing strategy and policy, and the buildings are fantastic, and they serve their purpose. So you did exactly what was asked of you. I was actually, when I began to speak just before you spoke, I was actually going to say it's more one for the cabinet member, although I appreciate it was before her time. It was a political decision. Tom, you did a great job, a fantastic job, but it was more that political decision of does the administration think it was £100 million well spent? And just before I shut up, to be fair, it's probably not a yes or no answer. It's hindsight is always easy, but I do think it was a decision by the administration as opposed to anything that Tom or others may have been involved in.
I'm happy to come in, but my understanding is it was very much a mix of a political decision and one driven by, us as a local authority. Our officer's job is to place plan, understand what the pupil projections are and work out what places are needed. My understanding was the political decision was how you did that, and whether you go down the route of porter cabins and temporary buildings for the bulges, or whether you kind of invest in better buildings. And you talked about, okay, we could see the bulge coming, therefore we knew it would come to an end. But it's done more than come to an end. It's now going down further. So that's the issue. Had it just been kind of come up and gone through, I think we wouldn't be in the same situation we are now. And other local authorities have had to close primary schools already. And we definitely don't want to be in that position. I think our schools and families have appreciated the being in nice classrooms rather than porter cabins. I think officers and us as policymakers have been creative with how we then use that space now, with the expansion of additionally resource provision and so on, and with more schools kind of hiring out their spaces as well to kind of other groups and other community groups, such as Merton Music Foundation now having both Merton Abbey and Sherwood as its base. So I don't think it is a yes or no question, like you say, and hindsight is always a wonderful thing. And yeah, if you can tell me exactly what the school population is going to be like for the next 20 years, that would make Tom's job a lot easier, but none of us can do this, and every local authority faces that challenge.
Well,
I come in as well.
I wasn't advocating porter cabins, but if this was before cabinet now, and we were looking at you were looking at £100 million spend, would you be recommending to your, and this is why I think this is clearly, unfortunately, directed at the cabinet member rather than officers, but would you be recommending to your colleagues £100 million spend on new buildings, or would you be saying we can see this is a bulge? I appreciate it wasn't known it would go down further, but it was known that the bulge would come out the other end. Would you be recommending £100 million on new buildings, or would you be saying we've got some fantastic sixth form buildings, let's replicate those at a significantly reduced cost?
I think also it's a little bit difficult because hindsight's a wonderful thing, and asking hypothetical questions are not easy.
I'm not really, because I'm being clear that we didn't know the further reduction, but we did know the bulge would come to an end. So funnily enough, I don't think it's a question for officers, and I don't think it's an unfair question to ask the current incumbent faced with that same situation what their decision would have been. I don't think that's unfair.
Yeah.
It is political, but I don't think it's unfair.
Right to ask any question. margin you like, but the bulges have come and gone. And I think historically, if you look through the numbers in Merton schools, they've gone up and down, because I can remember schools going to temporary 5 form-entry middle schools when we had them. Then they'd go back to 4. Some of the primary schools went up to 3, down to 2, back up to 3. It isn't constant. And I think that's the biggest nightmare for estimating places and establishments, because we do not know, and we do not know if it'll go up in the future. But if you'd like to answer, Ellie.
I'll give one comment to say that why I can't give you an answer is because it's not just a political decision. I care about detail. So I would have need to have been in that position whenever it was 10 years ago, looking at, well, what are these options? Because I very much doubt it was as binary as either of us are saying. It wasn't Portakabins or sixth forms or just brand new buildings. It would have been much more complex and nuanced than that. I don't have all that detail because I wasn't there running that. And that is what I can promise you I would do, is look at the detail and look at what is the right situation for each individual school and for us as a local authority.
Yeah, I'm just going to be old again. I just remember those conversations with Debbie Shears, who I had a great deal of time for, anticipating this bulge and saying, we've got to build so that we can actually accommodate these children. And I couldn't disagree with her. I could not disagree with her. And I would point out just one episode where hindsight, the beautiful thing, where we were really taken apart on it. Do you remember what happened to the Singlegate? Do you know, the old Singlegate school, which had a new bit of school built behind it, and we closed down. We sold off the old Singlegate building, and then come the bulge, we had to buy the blooming thing back. And I have to say, and I know this is not a political meeting, by the way, but the opposition at that time were pointing fingers and jumping up and down and saying, you were idiots, weren't you? And what could you say to it? Yes, we were. I think the expansion, in retrospect, was probably a pretty good thing, and I don't think we've got anything to be ashamed of. Thanks.
Departmental update. I think we've exhausted that area.
But as usual, there's a lot of very good news, and these meetings, as I always say, we inevitably concentrate on the challenges. We have to, because that's our role. We're scrutinizing. There's no point spending 2 hours congratulating everybody. We have to look at the areas of challenge, but it's not to detract from the fact that, as usual, there's a lot of extremely good news tonight.
I agree with you completely, James. Thank you. Got a question at all? Thank you very much for your report, Jane. Thank you. The Cabinet members' priorities, please.
Thank you, Sally. It's getting late, and it was only a few weeks since my last update. So my kind of broad headline priorities have remained very much the same as that. So it's focusing on this SEND provision and our services for children. You'll see the report. We still don't have an update on the DSG from the Department for Education, which is very frustrating and is affecting our financial planning as a council. But meanwhile, we're getting on with expanding the provision for those children. The other two priorities from last time similarly remain. So focus on youth voice, we talked about a lot today, and schools are kind of back being ready for Ofsted, and we're back providing all of our support for schools who need additional support. I shouldn't use the phrase back because that's been going on throughout, and Elizabeth will give me evil looks if I imply that any of that support started, but that's a big priority. So I just want to make a few separate points. Firstly, one that's come up a few times tonight about kind of what our job here is. And I see our role is we have to achieve the absolute best for our children and young people, both now, but for both now and in the future. So we gain absolutely nothing by overspending or any financial mismanagement, which means that in the future we have any limited budget. So that is very much what our job here is. So whenever I'm looking at proposals and plans, that's what I'm thinking is this right for now, and how will this stand in the future? So I hate when there are trade-offs, and there inevitably are trade-offs, and I absolutely love when you can do things that are actually genuinely efficient and deliver better outcomes to children and young people. So we've already been speaking about one earlier today, independent travel is a life skill, and that's why we want to do it. But it is also, if appropriate, can save costs. You've seen me kind of taking difficult decisions about the use of buildings, coming on from the previous conversation, to make sure that we're using the assets that the education team already own as efficiently as possible for the right needs as possible. That is exactly what I feel my job is and what I'm working with officers on. Two other much smaller points that have, one that's been mentioned already is fostering. Just today I was speaking to Dheeraj about doing another push on what we as counsellors can do to support with fostering. So I'll be coming back to you with that, and I'd really appreciate your support on that, because you will know your communities, you know the networks, you can help us to get those messages out. So I'm really keen to make sure that that is a kind of cross-party, cross-borough bigger push. And a third point that was mentioned in the departmental update, but there wasn't a question about, is that Harris Academy Wimbledon has been consulting on adding a admissions, a partially selective admissions, it's changing its admissions code so that 10% of its intake would be dependent on passing a musical aptitude test. And we as a local authority and our secondary heads and me as a Labour cabinet member find this really concerning. We find this concerning because we achieve brilliant results in Merton, and we achieve brilliant results as a comprehensive system. All of our neighbouring boroughs have some element of selection in most of their schools, and we don't. And we really worry that this could be the kind of thin end of the wedge, and then it could push other schools to start to make the case for similar situations, for similar arrangements. So we've pushed really strongly back against that. I support Harris Academy Wimbledon again when that was a politically difficult thing to do. I think it's a great school. It's gone down really well. It's one of the most popular schools in the borough already. But I am committed to keeping Merton secondary education as comprehensive and no selection by ability. Thank you.
Very much. Has anyone got any questions? Russell and then James.
On that last issue, Ellie, could you explain what the authority could actually do to stop Harris doing it? Because I see it as a free school, they can do what they want.
I might pass to Jane and Tom on the law, but essentially they can consult on whatever they want, and then what we can do is we have powers to then refer it up to the adjudicator if they're proposing something that we think is particularly controversial. So what we've been doing is essentially lobbying, both kind of formally and informally. So we've had responses go into the consultation, both from local authorities and from secondary heads, and we've been speaking to the school ourselves. Jane, Elizabeth, I don't know if you want to come in on kind of the legal route.
Tom is probably the best person to describe the process, what's legally allowed and not.
Okay, yeah, so all schools, no matter what category of school, have to comply with the National School Admissions Code, which sets out the rules for admissions. You are allowed to select by aptitude, not ability, on a limited number of subjects, one of which is the performing arts, or one of them. So music is one performing art. What you also are not allowed to do, though, is to admit anything that would benefit parents of a sort of higher socioeconomic income or greater education background. So there is, we think, some kind of grey area over whether it is definitely permitted. If you do disagree with any admissions policy, you have the ability following the consultation, if the admissions authority still wants to go through it, to go to the National Schools Adjudicator. So I think, it'll be a decision that if Harris do intend to, then it will probably go through that process, and the Schools Adjudicator will decide whether it will be implemented or not. But there has been a tightening up of the Schools Admissions Code in recent years, which makes it more difficult to have the kind of selection that some of the other boroughs have had, because generally you can continue with policies previously had.
Thank you, Chair. So on Harris. I hope we are able to stop them. I think I like the idea of schools being able to, as we all do, schools being able to make their own decisions and to specialise in something like music is a good thing, and to cater for young people who have particular ambitions or something they're good at, I think is really exciting. However, I've always said that I'm not in favour of schools being outside the control of elected representatives of the public, and I think that is the one downside of academies. So I hope we are able to stop that. On the cabinet members' report, thank you for that, and I think that there has been a degree. You used the phrase mismanagement of the budget. Certainly there is a really big problem there that needs to be dealt with. I'm conscious that I'm sitting next to my group whip, so I need to be a little bit careful, but I did at full council commend you and the leader for the courage that you have shown in dealing with a property owned by the authority, and that was a difficult decision. And Chair, I would also like to say, at risk of really being told off by my neighbour, that I do appreciate that it's a lot easier sitting in my chair than it is sitting in the cabinet member's chair, where these decisions actually have to be made. But it is the nature of politics that my role is to challenge and oppose, but I do appreciate my role is a lot easier than yours, and the decisions that come across your desk, and indeed the directors, and I do appreciate that. Thank you, Chair.
Has anyone else got any comments they might like to make? All right. Thank you, Ellie. Thank you. Being on to item agenda 10. Carl, are you there? Thank you.
Certainly am, Chair. I certainly am. Good
Thank
evening.
you.
And yes, indeed. So we are at the agenda item which talks about the performance update. So, and again, in time-honoured fashion, really, we have a cover note which outlines any areas where there's maybe a performance concern or a change in the rating with some explanatory notes. I would particularly like to draw members of this panel's attention to the sections regarding the indicator 16. So this is 2.1 onwards. And I recall clearly Councillor making a really astute observation at the last meeting and challenge actually to say, well, we keep using the explanation that small numbers actually make the average time of our care proceedings fluctuate. So what we have at 2.3 is a breakdown of the numbers, and I think what we can show in the report is that the numbers are indeed very low, and that an outlier, or if one or two families or children were affected by a delay, that would skew the overall averages. So I guess we're just showing some more detail there as requested, and just skipping through the report, and again with a slight reluctance because the error was certainly in my team. I'd like to just draw the attention of this panel to 2.11 and to a correction that I've had to make to the important indicator around the placement stability. There was a miscalculation in my team where we got our figures slightly wrong and therefore got the percentages slightly skewed. I've provided the updated percentages in the commentary to make sure that this is transparent and also now up to date, but I'll probably just leave it there and in time-honoured fashion be open to any questions the panel may have.
Carl, has anyone got any questions? We take Russell, then James.
Thank you for putting the bit in I asked about last time. It's just that at school, everything's based on percentages. And when you've got a class of 60, every child is 1.5%, which is ridiculous in some ways. Well, thank you for that, Carl.
James.
Can I ask I can't remember whether I asked this before, but I mean, I can guess, but not a target measure. What does that mean?
it means that we haven't defined or that there isn't in existence a particular target that we would be putting against a particular indicator. And that could be that we that there isn't one, that we or that we don't want to define one. This is particularly the case where you want to try and avoid any unintended consequences. So for instance, you probably wouldn't want to put a target on the number of child protection plans or the number of children in care. Because the risks would be that that might lead to unintended consequences in the decision making of social workers, which we want to be completely untarnished and solely based on the risk and need presented by the children in front of them. So that's the short answer to your question is there isn't anything that we've defined as a particular target that we want to be hitting, and then the long answer was that there's sort of some thinking behind that why that may be.
I completely understand that, and I 100% agree with what you've said as an answer. But then the challenge becomes this report once again, because having for years worked to try to persuade there to be a change so that we didn't constantly see the Greens, and the Greens are fantastic, but as a scrutiny panel, there's no point just looking at things that are working. We need to look at the inevitable things that aren't, and I say inevitable in the sense that every authority faces it. So having sort of, I felt, got to that point where we weren't going to keep Greens for too long. We were going to look at ambers and reds, which and every authority has ambers and reds. Now we're looking at things that don't have any target at all. I mean, it seems it's equivalent to looking at Greens, isn't it? So some of those, and it's partly directed at you, Carl, but also at the director. I mean, clearly it's inappropriate to have targets on some of these for the reasons that Carl has said, and it is appropriate for us as councillors to understand some of those measures, some of those results. But as a scrutiny panel meeting 6 times a year, Chair, now looking at you, Chair, once again, surely we need to be looking at things that we can actually scrutinise. What I want to see as a panel member is not that everything's perfect. We know nothing's perfect in life, but I want to see some reds and for officer comment from Carl or the director as to why they're red, and then to see them become amber, to see strategies working to improve those, and then to see them become green, and then to drop off. And to have, I thought, got to that point finally, to now see so many things where there's no target at all, it's a little bit like Sir Humphrey Appleby, to be honest. And Chair, I just appeal to you again as Chair. There's not that we cannot scrutinise things where there is no target and nothing to measure.
You're every right to make a point, and we are here to scrutinise whichever side we might be sitting on. And you're quite right. I don't know, Carl, how you or Jane want to come back on that, but perhaps it's something we need to reconsider.
I'll start and then Carl might want to come in, Chair. So I think there are some things on here that are not a target measure that you would as a panel want to be looking at. So for example, you would want to know how many children looked after we've got. So having that figure there for you to scrutinise allows you to see whether that figure is going up and down, the same as our US. And you may, as a panel, be particularly interested in the US, because obviously there's ongoing debates about the national transfer scheme, for example, and things like that. So I think those you would definitely want to look and be scrutinising. So those are some of the ones that are where we've got, and there are also somewhere, and again, the number of looked after children who were adopted, I'm sure you would want to be sort of aware of those. So quite a lot of those ones that are not target measures at the moment are either giving you what we've got around child protection plans per 100,000, so we don't want to target from that, but you really can see whether that's going up or it's coming down, and therefore what the impact might be on the department. That would be my start of a 10, and Carl might want to come in on that.
So I would agree with that, Jane, and it comes back to the discussion about what the purpose of this dashboard is. I've always understood the dashboard to do 2 things. One is to provide this panel with an understanding of how the system is behaving, a general understanding of our the population that we're working with, be that in children's social care or in some cases our early help or the education system. So some of those they're not really indicators, they're descriptive information, data information about how many children are in certain categories, be it children in need or child protection. So that gives the scrutiny panel an idea of what as a system we are working with. So I'd maybe put that in the basket of sort of descriptive measures, I guess. And then it does the second thing, which I think there are certain things which tells you how well the system is doing. And then those do tend to, by the way, have a target against them. So if you look at the percentage of single assessments, which by the way has changed in rating from green to an amber, which is slightly outside of our target. If you look at things about, there's other things about the reviews within timescales, or indeed the average time of care procedures, tells you how well the system is responding to the need that we're seeing. So that's my understanding of what this panel requires in order to do the job. And the other thing we would say is that some of the qualitative information comes through the director's report. So often you will find some narratives around some of those figures in the director's report. So if that is the purpose of the performance report, to describe what's happening in the system and how well it's doing, I think the measures that we have here do fulfill that task. And there have been things that have gone red. Indeed, one of which we already talked about today, the fostering is absolutely on here. The two indicators we have there around the number of foster carers recruited and the number of the proportion of children placed with in-house foster carers are both quite a glaring red. And quite rightly, I think the panel, or indeed Jane and Dheeraj, would expect the panel to be asking questions about that and for us to come back with explanations so that we can hopefully turn that to an amber or a green.
So Chair, thank you for the comments from the officers. I agree with what the director has said, but that has to be, what you've said needs to be balanced with the fact that we only meet 6 times a year. And a lot of this can be provided, as I've said many times again over the years, a lot of this can be provided as information items. We don't necessarily need to have it provided to us in this format when we meet so little. And the information absolutely is important, but it could come to us as members' briefings, which I've said many times over the years. And Chair, we don't meet very often, and we waste. There we are. I've done a slip now that's going to get me into trouble, haven't I? But I'll plough on anyway. We don't waste. We spend 15 minutes at the beginning of each meeting getting a COVID report, which could easily be delivered in writing. There's never anything about strategy. There's never anything about policy. It is only a report of the facts, which could easily be given to us in a written document. But instead, we spend 15 minutes listening to something that we can easily read.
Can I just explain, we do get that in a written document sent to us all.
Well, then even more so, we don't need the report. So, and in terms of what Carl has said, but Carl, I can't understand how you can continue to say my understanding of what's needed, because we've been here so many times before. But you've said it yourself this evening, to get a feel as to how the system is working, which is a phrase I really like. You've said just now that the best way to do that is targets. I mean, or to be fair, you didn't say that. You said often that is by setting these targets, and that's the point I'm making. So we're in agreement. So Chair, ultimately it's your decision. I'll do everybody a favor and shut up now, but it's the same thing I say each time, which is that we meet so little to have proper scrutiny. Let's have a revolving number of targets reported to us that show the progression from red. Every borough has red. That's not a party political point. From red to amber to green to drop off. And that, to quote Carl, will show us how the system is working. And that's what we need to do as members of this panel. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Just 1 minute, Dennis. No, thank you for that, James. We used to have the whole spreadsheet of everything, and we would go through that. Perhaps that's something that needs to come back. But I think what Carl has said, certain things, you can't force people to be foster parents. You can't say you are going to be, it's got to be their choice. It's a difficult and complex choice for a family to make. And so it's forever wanting more, but you're quite right. Others are measurable targets. And I understand what you're saying. You'd like to see through the report what actual processes have been used to achieve moving something from red to amber. Is that right? And
what we can scrutinize.
Yes.
And that and other important information that the director has said we should know, and I agree, that could easily be provided in a members briefing in a written document that's emailed to us. And we don't need to spend the limited time we have looking at that sort of information. That's useful background information that helps us do our job as councillors, but it doesn't need to be part of this meeting. That's my point.
No, thank you for that. And I think, Carl, perhaps in a future meeting, you could bring and take one particular item that has moved from red to amber and demonstrate what strategies have been used to achieve that progress. But you can't do it on everything in one go.
No, but the document
can.
The document can. The document can show something moving from red and then 6 months later to amber and 6 months after that.
Exactly, James. It takes time. You're quite right. It doesn't happen from one meeting to the next, but over time, we hope to see it. Yes. Well, I think you have been shown some improvement and everything is worked to be even better, but it doesn't have all the.
Yeah, you're right.
Answers.
It has the what we're shown has moved in that direction. Yes, that's fair.
Dennis did have his hand up. Oh, right. Sorry, I beg your pardon. Yes, sorry. Thank you very much, Carl, for your report. Interesting as always, and brings out interesting discussion, which is what we're all about. If we can look finally at the work programme, is everyone agreed with the work programme? And that meeting, whether it goes into Purdah or not, or just escapes for us to have it, well, we'll see you then with that work programme. Thank you very much to everyone who's coming. Thank you for everyone who's contributed towards the meeting, and especially Keith, do please take our thanks back to everyone involved in your report, which looks fantastic. And it's just something that's got to be developed and embedded. And I'm sure Jane and Elizabeth and Eleanor and the rest of us agree, embedded in our practice. So thank you very much. It brings hope. And that's what we want. And to have such a lovely young lady as Lola presenting it, and let's get her embedded in more